Thanks for staying with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. As always, we do want to continue on with some of our top stories that we're watching. I want to put up this live look that we have there of the White House. So as we know, the hours are still counting down as stocks and also rallied today before giving up on those gains amid more uncertainty over what's to come with President Trump's tariffs. Meanwhile, the White House is continuing to dig in against the doubters amid growing scrutiny. Fox News correspondent Connor Hansen has much more.
A week after a long list of new tariffs were placed on different countries, the White House says it's standing firm in the face of turbulent markets.
Markets move up, markets move down. The big trading partners that have been giving us massive trade deficits for years, even decades, because of their unfair trade policies, that's what we're focused like a laser beam on.
Stocks having an up and down day Tuesday amid news that some countries now want to come to the table and negotiate on trade. But after China missed President Trump's deadline to remove its retaliatory tariffs, the White House says it will impose 104% tariffs against China starting Wednesday.
Countries like China, who have chosen to retaliate and try to double down on their mistreatment of American workers, are making a mistake. President Trump has a spine of steel, and he will not break.
Democrats say the tariffs have gone too far.
This economy is teetering on the edge of collapse.
The situation creating some strife between the president's advisors after Elon Musk said last weekend he'd like to see a, quote, zero tariff situation between the U.S. and Europe. Trade advisor Peter Navarro had this to say.
The thing that's, I think, important about Elon to understand, he sells cars.
Elon fired back Tuesday on X, calling Navarro a moron. The White House says it's not concerned about the spat.
Boys will be boys.
The Trump administration says about 50 different countries have been in contact. China says it's willing to, quote, fight to the end. In New York, Connor Hansen, Fox News.
All right, our thanks to Connor Hansen for that report. And again, on your screen there is the countdown. As we know, we are just less than 2 hours away from the latest form of those tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. The White House, though, saying with those 104% tariffs starting at midnight Eastern time. President Trump, though, had threatened an extra 50% on tariffs against China, in addition to an initial 20% that was supplemented by the 34% reciprocal tariffs levied last Wednesday. This after Beijing said that it would respond with its own 34% tax of its own. With all of these changes and as it pertains to tariffs, I want to bring into the conversation now Mark Mueller there with the University of California, San Diego. Mark, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. So many changes have come with these tariffs. What can you first now say on what items this may specifically impact?
What items in terms of goods? They are broad, so they are countrywide. The news, I think, really is that most countries won't retaliate. Australia is not intending to. The United Kingdom has announced it, and India might be reluctant. Many countries, 50 we hear, have come to negotiate. So China is an outlier, and maybe the increase from 50-some to 104% in the tariff that we impose on Chinese goods now is a signal to those countries who do want to negotiate that that's the right choice. So I'm still hopeful, and how it exactly plays out, we'll see.
And it's been interesting because we've been watching as so many people are responding to these tariffs, some saying, hey, this is a good thing, this is a negotiating tactic. Can you sort of talk about how this would be a negotiating tactic for the Trump administration to get other things done in response to these tariffs being placed as well?
Well, in your little contribution just now, you showed that within the administration, voices differ. The European negotiation team seems to propose a 0 for 0 proposal. That is zero tariffs here for zero tariffs on U.S. goods in Europe. but not everyone in the administration seems to agree. It's therefore a bit hard to foresee exactly how this will play out and what really is the end game for the administration. The voices differ. Personally, I much hope that the voices of negotiation and favorable reciprocal treatment for changes in foreign tariffs on our goods it will prevail, but it is unclear at this point. We hear different voices.
I do want to put this up on the screen here. This is President Trump's Truth Social post in response to why he imposed the 104% tariff on China. It says oil prices are down, interest rates are down. So the slowing moving Fed should cut rates. Food prices are down. There is no inflation. And the longtime abused USA is bringing in billions of dollars a week from the abusing countries on tariffs that are already in place. This is despite the fact that the biggest abuser of them all, China, whose markets are crashing, just raised its tariffs by 34% on top of its long-term ridiculously high tariffs, plus not acknowledging by warning for abusing countries not to retaliate. They've made enough for decades for taking advantage of the good old USA. Our past leaders are to blame for them allowing this and so much else to happen in our country. Make America great again. That's the response that he says there. But he also, I want to focus on the beginning of that statement. He says oil prices are down, interest rates are down, and there's no inflation. First of all, can you just sort of speak to the no inflation part? What is he trying to say by saying there's no inflation?
So the fear with these tariffs is that they will ultimately pass through to our prices. Inflation, we usually mean the ongoing change in prices up and up and up and up, slowly or faster. The tariffs will have a one-time effect, but it can be huge. Much of our imports come from China. The minimum tariff increase of 10% on everyone in the world and of much more to others amount to about 20% on average. That excludes the 104% that was just recently imposed on China. So those are large shocks to the cost of importing, and they will be passed through to firms who use the intermediate inputs for their production, and ultimately to consumers, or directly to consumers if they're consumer good imports. Some of the foreign goods will decline in price. So say a good has a 20% tariff on it now. It will be a little cheaper in the world market after we, the big consumer of these goods, refuse to buy them at the old scale. But much of it will be passed through. So we are looking, if the tariffs stay in place and the negotiation teams don't succeed quick enough, we are looking at an inflation jump up. So that inflation hasn't responded yet is just a matter of a delay, because contracts, pricing choices, they adjust gradually, and I don't view that as a sign of what we're in for.
And Mark, we do know that the United States, China, two of the largest economies in the world, often affect how the rest of the world operates as well. Do we think that this growing trade war between our two nations could impact other nations far reaching from us, including other nations that produce a lot of products, including there in Southeast Asia, namely India?
So all the countries who compete with China in the United States marketplace, they now have an easier time competing at the 54% tariff that was imposed so far, and the 104% that will probably come soon. So they get into position. There are countries out there, the United Kingdom I mentioned, Australia, who don't seem ready to retaliate. And countries in between, I put the European Union there, who want to first try and negotiate, and then would probably consider retaliatory steps if it doesn't work. But just to put that into perspective, by the way, negotiating simultaneously with 50 teams is quite a task for an administration. Plus, don't forget the US trade representative in his office. They always have quite a large bureaucracy to grant firms exemptions from the tariffs. Those exemption requests will now come in flooding. And so they are in for a lot of work. And I do not think any administration would have an easy time handling all that workload in negotiations and dealing with domestic companies who need exemption.
And Mark, the fallout is also continuing right now on the stock market. We know that these tariffs have had a dramatic impact in the last few days. Late last week, in fact, we saw those markets tank. All three main indexes closed down today as well. What else could be in store as we're talking about the volatility of the markets as these tariffs go into effect in just a number of hours?
I think volatility is to stay with us. And the reason is that neither is the end game clear. We just heard in your own reporting that Peter Navarro, the trade advisor to President Trump, and Elon Musk, the Department of Efficiency head, disagree. And they are prominent figures in the administration. So the end game is completely unclear. And then the pathway is as well. Even if we knew now what the end game is, namely say 0 for 0 is what we want to go for, with all the countries who are willing to do it. China is probably not one of them. So even if we had the certainty that's where we're going for, there are 50 teams to negotiate with on issues that have been around for decades and not been resolved. So this is not going away anytime soon. And that uncertainty will weigh on businesses. It will weigh on investment choices, employment choices, location choices, and the stock market will reflect that uncertainty. We are in for a lot more ups and downs.
And Mark, before I let you go, this may be too plain of a question to ask, but how long do you think it will take for the average American to start seeing some of the impacts? Again, we know the tariffs are set to go into effect. I want to put up the count down there on the screen in just 1 hour and 39 minutes. But it's going to take a bit longer for Americans to feel the true impact. When do you see that happening?
Well, one impact I've seen on my retirement account. It's going down mostly and up a little occasionally. So that one we'll all see right away. When the inflation will kick in, I wish I knew. As I said, I don't even know the end game. So let alone know how we will get there. If quick negotiation results came about within weeks, then I think the inflation impact would be much less. But if these negotiations take a while, the tariffs are in place and stay, we will probably see a jump in, well, not a jump, but a quick increase in prices over the course of the next months to year. On average, the tariffs are 20% now. The tariff increase is 20% now, with some adjustment of foreign goods coming in cheaper because they're less valued once the United States refuses to buy them at the old scale. We can have quite an inflation jump of multiple percentage points this year.
And we've also seen some of these businesses who do import their items from China or some of these other countries that have had these high tariffs placed against them, putting in the byline as folks buy some of those goods, saying this is a tariff charge, trying to make it clear to the buyer that this isn't something that they necessarily want. Do you feel like this is something that businesses will continue to do until some of these trade measures are ultimately resolved?
Hard to say. So businesses, of course, will adjust their pricing. But for all the goods that are already here, they don't have to. So for the goods that are coming in over the next weeks and months, whose price will increase because the customs officer assesses a new tariff on them, those prices will be passed through mostly if they're consumer goods. If they're intermediate inputs, then the companies will strive to substitute, as we say in economics, to try and replace the goods from countries that have the strongest tariff increases with goods from countries that only, say, are subject to the 10% baseline. And that scrambling by companies to adjust their supply chains will play out over weeks and months. And the price increase that will still remain will then be passed through.
All right, again, Mark Mueller there with the University of California, San Diego, giving us just another insight into these tariffs that are impending. Mark, any final thoughts before I let you go?
Final thoughts. I think nothing is final on this policy issue. Let's take it day by day, or maybe actually in 15-minute intervals as we watch what news come in.
All right, if we're taking it in 15-minute intervals, that countdown is certainly going and on. Again, Mark Mueller there with the University of California, San Diego, helping us to break down the very latest on these impending 104% tariffs on China. We appreciate you, Mark, for joining us here on Live Now.
Thank you, Christina.
All right, did want to bring that to you guys here on Live Now from Fox. We're going to continue on talking about some of these tariffs and the impacts as well. We now want to turn our attention to Fox 5 in New York. A very popular item, one you might have in your hand right now, is going to be facing the impact of these tariffs. I'm talking about the iPhone. Let's check in with Fox 5 New York on some of their reporting.
Sum up the price projections that iPhones could soon cost as much as $2,300 each as a result of the tariffs imposed by President Trump on China, leading some to start asking how committed they are to their iPhone.
I think it is a big leap, but I love my iPhones.
It's a love that'll be tested since most iPhones are still made in China, which President Trump has hit with massive tariffs that could push the price of the most popular smartphone in America to around $3,000. Still, iPhone users we talk to tell us that they'll resort to other cost-saving methods before thinking of switching to other brands.
I will probably hang on to my iPhone and get a lot of screen protectors, and make it last.
Probably start thinking about like how often am I going to upgrade my phone? Maybe like not every 2 years, maybe every 3 years or 4 years, and maybe put a little bit of money into switching out the batteries or upgrading the camera.
We'll make it work as far as like spreading our payments out like we've done before. So we're not really seeing what it really costs.
Apple is reportedly in negotiations with the White House and China to try to carve out an exception for iPhones. Tech analysts say Apple takes pride in keeping their prices leveled and that customers have that working for them for now.
I think it will hold the line as long as possible, but these tariffs are so high, I don't know how long they can do that. It's possible they could go up 10%. It's possible they go up 25%. It's possible they could go up even more.
iPhones are big business for Apple. Each year, they're selling more than 220 million of them, and the U.S. is one of their largest markets. Financial analysts say while the company might be able to absorb a little bit of the increase in tariffs, that it would just be a fraction of the problem they're facing. In the meantime, users are taking notes on how to avoid having to run out and get a new iPhone.
I'm just gonna, make sure I don't drop my phone for a while.
This as the price of an iPhone won't be dropping anytime soon either. In Midtown, Arthur Chien, Fox 5 News.